Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point on AFR Talk. You know, I've lived down here in the South for 4 years, and I went to grad school in Dallas, Texas. I went to grad school in the South for 4 years, and what I discovered is this is a very comfortable, relaxed, casual way of talking. It's the easiest way to talk, and it's just almost impossible not to adapt because it is so relaxed. It's so casual. It is so comfortable. You almost, as you just kind of talk with a Southern kind of lilt, you just kind of feel yourself sitting out on the front porch, rocking in your chair with your hunting dog right there on the porch with you. When I had gone to 1 year of grad school in Dallas, I came back and I worked in retail that following summer. I'd only been in the South for 9 months. And I wasn't even aware that I had adopted, but I had people asking me where I was from. Well, I was from Northern California, which is where I was working. That's where I went to junior high. That's where I went to high school. That's where I went to college. That's where I worked for 2 years after college. I was a Northern California boy. But after 9 months in the South, people were asking me where I was from. So, it's just such a comfortable, relaxed way of talking. It's like slipping on a pair of very comfortable sandals. Now, I think all of you know my affection for and respect for Sarah Palin. I mean, I would sooner have Sarah Palin in D.C. than just about any one of those bozos right now, pardon my French, that are a part of the GOP establishment. I mean, I would trade 100 of them for one Sarah Palin in Washington, D.C. And she spoke at a graduation ceremony over the weekend at a high school that had 26 people graduating. And you got to ask yourself the question, now what is Sarah Palin doing, a woman of her stature, of her visibility, her prominence, going to a little out-of-the-way burg like Republic, Washington, to give a graduation speech to a class of 26? Well, I've got an excerpt here, just about 2 minutes. It's rather long. It's longer than what we normally play, but I wanted you to get a feel for it because she tells a little bit of a story about her own family, and the pieces begin to fall into place. Let's listen.
The teacher sent his wife and 3 babies ahead of him to Skagway, Alaska, which is a little tiny gold mining town. He'd drive up then his old Ford station wagon, a big old ugly brown station wagon. It was jam-packed with his worldly possessions, a crib, some fishing poles, and a gun. He was probably one of those early bitter clingers holding on to his God, his guns, and his Constitution. But on the drive, this guy's car broke down. He was out in the middle of nowhere. He was stuck. Remember back in the day, they had no cell phones, couldn't call for help. The best that he could do was just kind of jerry-rig this piecer together and just pray that he could crawl into the next town because he had to find a mechanic. And he feared at the time really that he was doomed, that this big repair job, it was going to cost hundreds of dollars, which was way more than he had. And it looked like the man's dream was over before it began. Maybe he thought a moment of doubt, maybe it just wasn't meant to be because of these obstacles in the road. But he did make it to that next town, little tiny, and he found a mechanic. And then he waited, and he waited, and he waited all day in the little town's local diner. And he got to know the very, very nice people of the town. And they were so gracious to him as he told them about the life that he hoped to live in Alaska. All the while, though, of course, worrying what it was going to do when the bill came due. Finally, the bill came. And 49 years ago, this very week, that school teacher got a lesson in the plain, ordinary, everyday kindness that small-town America is all about. For all those repairs on that old Ford, that local mechanic charged him just $10. And then the nice townspeople, they sent him on his way north to follow his dream. And his compass was pointed due north, true north. That school teacher was my dad, Mr. Heath. And that small town was your small town. It was Republic, Washington. And mechanic was a guy named Mr. Carter. And my dad has never forgotten him, nor the kindness shown by this town. You got us on our path towards destiny.
That's a pretty cool little clip. Sarah Palin, audio was not real great on that. It was kind of recorded by a video camera. So the audio might have been a little bit difficult to pick up. But Sarah Palin talking about an episode in her family 49 years ago this very week. Her father had sent his family, Sarah Palin was a baby at the time, up to Alaska, was driving the family car up, had a breakdown in a small burg. Mechanic fixed it for $10. The people were really nice, sent him on his way. And it was the little town of Republic, Washington, and Sarah Palin coming back simply to honor them and thank them for their kindness shown to her family. You know, it's one of the things, it's interesting that the scriptures talk about entertaining strangers unawares, and you may be entertaining angels unawares. Now, Sarah Palin is not an angel, other than in the symbolic kind, but here's a little town that went out of its way to just show kindness to a stranger, to provide help, to provide hospitality, to provide encouragement. Never forgotten. 49 years later, those small, simple acts of kindness still remembered. So it's a kind of a lesson, I think, to all of us. You just never know how some simple little expression of kindness and love may touch somebody's life and even possibly change the arc of their future. She said, you got us on our path toward our destiny. Now let's talk a little bit about this IRS, this growing IRS scandal. Got a David Axelrod clip, clip number 2 here, Rob. And, as you listen to this clip and David Axelrod explaining this IRS thing, realize that people like David Axelrod, they think they're the smartest people on planet Earth. They think they are the elite. They are head and shoulders above all of us in intelligence and ahead of us in smarts and in wisdom. And now we know, no matter what David Axelrod says here, we know that this whole IRS scandal was orchestrated from the IRS office in Washington, D.C. 88 IRS staffers now implicated in this harassment of conservative and Tea Party groups. This was orchestrated, and it came from the people that are running the IRS. And it turns out that the head of the IRS, this Douglas Schulman guy, who, by the way, was a Democrat donor. Remember, the Democrats couldn't stop talking about the fact that he was a Bush appointee. This is Bush's fault. This is Bush's guy. Bush appointed him. It turns out, number one, he is a Democrat and a Democrat donor. And number two, his wife campaigned for Barack Obama. And she supported Occupy Wall Street. You want to know why the IRS never went after the Occupy groups? Well, because the head of the IRS was married to somebody involved in Occupy. His wife running Occupy, helping Occupy, supporting Occupy. Her husband running the IRS. He says, man, you stay away from the Occupy group. I don't want to get caught up in that net. So now here is David Axelrod, and listen to what now we know that people of his ilk were involved in this, so this is pretty self-incriminating if you ask me. Let's listen.
But see, the problem with this is they were going after the conservative groups and not after liberal groups. So there was a targeting mechanism that was built into that. And then individuals, conservative individuals, that seem to be going after. It is the IRS using their position for political intimidation. And David, I can't imagine.
Congresswoman, I think it was an idiotic thing to do. But I will point you to the Inspector General's report that said it wasn't done for a political reason. They were flooded with applications.
David, that's very hard to swallow. When you're a Republican, it's very hard to swallow that it wasn't done for political reasons when the words that were chosen as target words were conservative, Tea Party, patriot. When you have a group that was supporting President, the 2007 group Freedom Watch that we saw yesterday come out, where donors were getting audited and targeted as well, not just the groups. This is very hard. It's very easy for your side to say it isn't political. It's very hard for our side to accept it when we're the ones being targeted.
Well, and this was part of a 2-year.
It was the Inspector General said that. I've said this many times. If there was somebody political involved in this, it never would have happened because it was the stupidest thing you could imagine.
Well, it turns out that it was political. Somebody political was involved in this, head of the IRS, who went to the White House 157 times. That's political. Head of the IRS, 157 visits to the White House. So he's political. He's going to the White House. He's meeting with political people. So it's all these political wizards of smart in the White House and in the IRS that are responsible for this harassment of conservative groups. And David Axelrod said, well, these people are idiots. This is the stupidest thing you could imagine. So he's saying that about his own people. He's saying that about the staffers in the White House. They are idiots. He is saying that this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard anybody do. And now we know that it was done by people in the White House, done by people at the IRS, done by Lois Lerner, who's now on paid vacation. You know, and Axelrod just says a couple of things that are simply not true here. For one thing, he says in there that the IRS was flooded with applications. We've been over this before, but it bears repeating. There were actually fewer applications for C4 status, 501c4 status, fewer tax-exempt applications the year this harassment started than the year before. Fewer. So you can't explain this on the ground that they were just overwhelmed with this tide of applicants for tax-exempt status. You know, and Anna Navarro is a conservative on there, and she points out, look, you cannot plausibly argue this wasn't political when the words that were in there were conservative and Tea Party and Constitution and Patriot. Those are the search words that they were looking for. You cannot possibly argue that this wasn't political in nature. So that is David Axelrod trying to do his best, and lamely, I might add, to defend this IRS scandal, and in the meanwhile calling his own people stupid and idiots in the process. When we come back, we will play a couple of more clips on this IRS scandal. A couple of deal with Eric Holder and what he was doing, the skullduggery he was involved in over at the Department of Justice. And it's interesting to see the number of people. Now, Arianna Huffington out there calling for Eric Holder's resignation. You've got people in the White House accusing him of mismanagement, of, forget the word they use, starts with an M. I wanted to say malevolent or malicious, which would be accurate, but it was maladroit. He's just clumsy. So that's the White House spin. This guy's just too clumsy to be the Attorney General. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I think the White House is getting ready to throw him under the train, because this is people in the White House. They're willing to dump Eric Holder's body into the sea if it will protect Barack Obama. Back in 2.